In this video, we will talk about running records. For some of you, this will be a quick review over what we did last week with Dr. Kier. And for those of you who were out, this may be new information. What you might want to have with you is you may want to print out the slides for this PowerPoint. Those are under course documents, under PowerPoints. And then you will also want to have a pencil and a blank sheet of notebook paper and or printer paper, because we are going to do an example towards the end. So what is a running record? A running record is a quick informal reading assessment, and it is informal because it's not normed. Therefore, we're looking at the individual child's reading behaviors, not at the individual child's reading behaviors compared to children of his or her own age. So it's very informal. It has been coined a quick informal reading assessment. However, I will be honest, with a classroom full of children, performing running records can be time consuming. So there are ways in the classroom to perhaps make it more quick by using tape recorders. It's also where it sort of got its name by Marie Clay, who is the founder of sort of the notion of doing a running record, as well as Reading Recovery, the program Reading Recovery, believed that a running record was basically a process in which we could record a child's reading behaviors that could be done on the run, and that it could be something that we could mark and notate as teachers universally, so that we could put it into some sort of portfolio for a child and be able to hand them to teachers for the next year. So it really is a very quick and informal assessment in which many people have noted a very powerful tool, but it's only as powerful as it is your ability to execute a running record, and more importantly to execute a miscue analysis. We will not be talking about a miscue analysis on this video, but we will be talking about it on next week's video. So what is the purpose of a running record? Well, not only is it a quick, powerful tool to capture reading behaviors, but it can help in the placement of children. It can help in determining flexible grouping for instruction, as well as it can decide what text is appropriate, particularly on the instructional level for an individual. It can rule out what is perhaps on the independent and on the frustration level, so that we can find texts that are on that instructional level, particularly for grouping for guided reading. It can also capture reading behavior, which is then later analyzed in a miscue analysis. And it allows us to sort of see what readers are doing when they read text. What are the strategies that they're using, and what behaviors are they, pulling together, so to speak, to read. And that'll make more sense when we talk about the different components, the 3 different components in a miscue analysis. And also, once again, as I said earlier, it allows us to document progress in reading, and to be able to do this for sort of typically developing readers 4 to 5 times a year. And for our struggling readers, we can do this, or readers who may be in Tier 1 or Tier 2 instruction, we can do this much more often to make sure that the texts that we're using for instructional and intensive instruction are indeed at their instructional level. So what do I do during a running record? Well, as the teacher, or the tutor in this case, with partner power, is that you're going to note everything the student says or does while reading orally using a marking system. Now, the marking system, there are many different ways in which teachers, since the sort of introduction of running records, have come up with marking running records. However, I'm going to show you the system in which Dr. Kier introduced last week, and that some of you may already know. But just keep in mind that as you do running records in your school district, or if you do them in your own classroom, that it's likely that you'll want to be able to follow either the district's guidelines for a running record, or you'll want to be able to do notations and marks that are clear enough that any teacher who understands the reading, writing, or the running record process and the marking system can be able to pick up and read and understand. So what materials do I need to perform a running record? Well, the beauty of a running record is that it's very simplistic. You don't need copies and copies of passages. You simply need a text that is near or on the child's level. That's your best guesstimation. It is by no means, choosing a book level for a child is by no means a science. There is no one exact way to do it. We use assessment data to help us do that, and you can use the results from the 3-minute assessment to sort of help you guide whether or not they're a 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, etc. book level. So you need a text in which there are at least 100 words and it's approximately on their level. You need a sheet of blank paper. This can be notebook paper, legal paper, or blank printer paper. I like to do my running records on legal paper, and I like to skip every line, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like here in a second. So you need the text, a sheet of blank paper, a pencil, and then of course working knowledge of the marking system. Now I want to encourage you that it takes a good 2 hours of practice to sort of get a hang of the marking system. So if you feel uncomfortable or not feeling super confident with the marking system, that's okay. There are ways to sort of help you with that, and a tape recorder is one of them. So under the optional materials, I've also included a tape recorder, and or you can actually have the text or the words from the text typed on one side of the paper or typed in a larger font with spaces so that you can do the marking on top of the words. When I started doing running records, I always typed in a larger font with a couple of spaces in between and just did my marking of the words on top of the actual text words. It just was easier for me, and that's completely fine if that is something that you want to do. I also used a tape recorder, and I still use a tape recorder just because when I started doing running records, I was with middle school and high school students, and they do tend to read quicker, though do make miscues. They do tend to read quicker, and so that tape recorder, I could not have to worry as much about the marking system, but just listening to them read and then coming back and double checking my marks. So those are optional materials if you'd like to have them. So what are the steps in a running record? Well, first step obviously is choosing that text that you think is approximately at your student's reading level, and that could probably be the most difficult. However, do not beat yourself up if you feel that you're having a hard time finding a text. Approximate. Give a running record with your student, and then that running record will give you some indication of whether or not that text is too easy, it's right on instruction, or it's past instruction. It's more frustrational. If that's the case, you can always give a running record the next week. Running records in a one-on-one situation do not take a long time to do. And the more that you give them, the more practice that you have at the marking system. So the first time you give the running record, if you feel the text was way off, that's okay. Try it again. Now, once you've chosen that text, you want to sit close enough to the child so that you can hear him read and see his or her text if you do not have a copy of the text with you or a copy of the text printed on your running record marking sheet. You want to have the child read at least 100 words of the text. The passage is not timed, and you may allow the child to read through it 1 to 2 times prior to giving the running record. There are various debates on this. Some teachers and scholars say you want to give a cold reading without the child having any exposure to the text whatsoever. And then you have other teachers and scholars that say no, if you give a cold reading, that doesn't give a clear indication of the actual cueing systems that they use while they're reading. So I'm going to leave that choice up to you. If you give a cold reading, meaning that the child does not see the text prior to giving the running record, just mark that. If you do allow the child to read through it 1 to 2 times silently prior to the running record, just mark that. Just let me know either way. I'm going to let you be the teacher and the scholar on that and decide whether or not you want to give a cold reading or whether or not you want to give the student a little bit of a warm-up. And then the last step is while the child is reading, you mark your record accordingly. So what are some of the symbols for marking text during a running record? Well, the first one is a check mark for accurate reading. You could also do a V above each word. Some people do not even do checks or V's if they're using a running record sheet where the words are printed over. They just mark the substitutions, self-corrects, omissions, insertions, repetitions, etc. But for this particular class and for the running record in this class, I would like for you to try to do the checks and the V's above each word. Either or is fine with me. I do a check. Some people find it easier to do a V. So we do that above accurately read words. Next we have substitutions. And if you notice, the word that is correct is on the bottom of the line. That's the word in the text. What the student says is on top of the line. So here we have a student substituting the word big for bright. And so we've written big over bright in our marking system. If they self-correct that, we write an SC next to the word to their first attempt, and then we circle it. So here they first said big, and then they realized, wait, no, that's bright. They self-corrected it. Okay. Next, an omission is just a blank above the line. They completely omitted that word. An insertion is a caret, and then we want to write where they put the caret, where they inserted it in the sentence, and then the word above the caret that they inserted, just as if you were editing someone's paper and asking them to insert a particular word. Repetition is an R over the word. For instance, say the student said bright. They repeated the word bright. Then we'd put an R. If they repeated it twice, bright, bright, you could put an R2, or you could put 2 little tally marks. R3 if they repeated it 3 times, etc. Now for a sentence or a chunk of a sentence, if they repeat the entire thing, we want to put an arrow from the last word that they repeated all the way back to the first word that they repeated. So for instance, here the child has repeated a bright new day, a bright new day. So we know that that's a repeat. And just as we could do with the words, we can put tally marks or a number next to the R to indicate how many times the child repeated the phrase. So if they repeat it once, we just have an R. If they repeat it twice, we have an R2 or an R with 2 tally marks. That's completely up to you. The next symbol that we have is for a pause. Now a pause is when a student clearly is reading and stops. For whatever reason, if they're concentrating on the word usually. So once they stop, we want to put a P above the word that they stop at. Now I'm going to show you the next part's a little tricky. It's what we call the appeal and told. The student appeal and the teacher prompt, or the teacher told. What I'm going to encourage you to do first is to, if a child pauses at a word and then asks for assistance, I want you to, well, let me rewind here. If a child pauses at a word, I want you to put a P. Wait 3 seconds, so 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. If they're still paused, you can say to the student, you try it, and then wait 3 more seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. And at that time, notate any attempts, if any. If they're still unsuccessful, go ahead and give a told, meaning go ahead and tell them the word. Okay? So I'd encourage you to go ahead and in all of that, we still waited essentially 6 seconds before we actually gave them the word. So we give them a little bit more wait time, a little bit more opportunity for the wait time. If you feel like you need to give more than 3 seconds, that's fine, but I wouldn't go beyond 5 seconds for the pause or the wait time. For multiple substitutions, Dr. Keir showed this where she had them above one another. You can do that if you have enough space to do them above one another, or you can do them side by side, obviously with the furthest on the left being the first opportunity for sounding out the word, and then the word at the very end being the last attempt. And clearly this student in this particular substitution did not self-correct to ground, but kept it at grund. Which brings me to another point. When students are substituting words, do your very best to record phonetically what the student is saying. Because here, this gives me an idea, just looking at this, that the student is first attempting to sound out. So they're using those graphophonic, graphophonemic cues, the letter sound combination cues. And then they're attempting or substituting a word that they know for it, but they realize, no, that probably doesn't make sense. So they're also using some semantic understanding. And then they try to sound out again, but it's still not the ow sound in ground. So that gives me some indication that they're using both semantics as well as those visual graphophonemic cues or graphophonic cues. So these are the symbols for marking that we're going to talk about here. Now I want you to do your best, study those, and perhaps in the next slide we're going to do an example. You may want to go through the example a couple of times just so that you feel, those of you that are very new to the marking system, that you feel as comfortable as possible with the marking system. And those of you that are brand new to a running record process in general, you may indeed want to use a tape recorder or a recorder of any type to do your running record. Okay, so let's now do an example. Okay, now we're going to try an example. This is a passage of 103 words, the first 3 paragraphs, from Chapter 4 of A Tales of the Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. And I'm going to do my very best to read in a 4th grade voice, but you'll at one point hear a differentiation between the student and the teacher when I do an ask and told example. So I will do my very best to differentiate between the student and the teacher. So, ready or not, here we go. We live near Central Park. On nice days, I like to play there after school. I'm allowed to walk over by myself as long as I'm going to be with friends. My mother doesn't want me hanging out in the park alone. For one thing, Jimmy Farga has been mugged 3 times, twice for his bicycle and once for his money. Only he didn't have to give the muggers. I've never been mugged, but sooner or later I might. What's that word? You try it. What's that word? Probably. Probably will be. My father told me what to do. Give the muggers whatever they want, and try not to get hit on the head. Okay, so I did my very best to go through and give you a few opportunities for marking miscues. So let's now look at sort of what you did compared to the miscues that I got. So Here we have my sheet of miscues, and I have chosen to do mine on a legal pad. For me, that's just a lot easier because I'm able to skip as many as possible and then be able to put the number of correct checks on the left hand side without any of the holes being in the way. That's just how I've always done it. However, how you do it, that's up to you. But if you can see in the first line, there are 12 checks, meaning 12, every word in that line was accurately read. My first miscue is on the second line, where instead of saying aloud, I say alode, but I self-correct it right after. In the next line, I have all accurate reading. And then in the fourth line, you can see that I have inserted out and in, but I've omitted around. So I've got the carets for out and in, but I've got the slash over the word around to indicate an omission. In the next line, I attempt Jimmy Fargo's name. I attempt Fargo. And you can see my first, my second, and my third attempt, none of which were correct. And I've got I've got a breve indicating the short O sound over the O to help me with the phonetic, to write it phonetically, so that when I'm looking back later, I can obviously see phonetically what the student tried to pronounce when reading. The next line is all accurate reading. And then the next line, the student inserted to, omitted any. On the next line, it's accurate reading. And the next line was a bit more tricky, or trickier. The student first said might, and then paused and asked. The teacher said, you try it. And I paused again, and the teacher said, you try it. And then I paused again, and the teacher told me probably. So then I repeated probably, but then got everything else in that line correct. And then in the next line, I repeated whatever they want. And I only repeated it once. As you can see, there's only one R. And I repeated those 3 words. And then in the last line, all words are accurately read. So if yours resembles pretty much what I have, then you were pretty close. You were pretty dead on. If it's a little bit of a variation, particularly on the might and probably, if the seconds are a little different, that's completely fine. That one was very difficult to reenact. But as long as, I look at this and I'm able to see, and you're able to see later on when you're doing your miscue analysis, that they really took quite a bit of time on this probably word, and they only tried one word. They didn't even really try to sound this word out. This gives me some indication that that word probably, for various reasons, was difficult, a difficult word for them, and gives me some clues into, once again, their reading behaviors. When a word is too difficult in this instance, this student did not use a whole lot of strategies to figure the word out. So if your miscues may not be 100% exact, but if they are close, that is wonderful. If you have any questions about this example, please feel free to email me and or call me. Let me know. And I look forward to helping you out with your running records the best that I can in class this Thursday.